And the most important rule for budget is we have to have a balanced budget. We also have a limitation on our debt capacity. Now, right now, this is not written into law, and I expect this to be an issue this year. We have had an informal rule of thumb that we will not issue debt over and above 5% of our general fund. So in other words, if we take in $15 billion in general funds, we will not issue new debt more than 5% as against that general fund. And that's just sort of been a rule of thumb that we've used. The governor has proposed some significant new borrowing for transportation projects. I expect the Senate to push back against that. I also expect Senator Sasslow has talked about putting in a constitutional amendment to put this 5% standard in our state constitution. So if we would do that, we would have to pass it through the Assembly, not just this year, but also next year, and then it would go to the voters. I think, again, I would generally favor this, having a cap on the amount of debt that we can issue as a state. Whether 5% is the right number, I'm absolutely open to various arguments on that. I don't want to be in a position like states like California, which simply just issue IOUs and see their credit rating essentially slide away. So that is a limitation on what we can do. As I've said before, we don't have a monetary policy in Virginia. I know one delegate who shall remain nameless has proposed one. I think I'll just leave that up to the feds and let them worry about that. But basically, we don't print money, and I'd like to keep it that way. Go ahead. The issue of transportation debt. This has become a larger and larger issue. When I came into the Assembly 10 years ago, by and large, we were still a pay-as-you-go state for transportation. And historically, as you know, Virginia, dating back to the 1920s when the Highway Department of Transportation was set up, they had a gas tax, and that money directly went to build farm-to-market roads. And that's how we got started in Virginia. That trust fund has declined over time, not just in inflation-adjusted dollars, but also real dollars. And the reason for that is quite simple. Today, I drove my car here. I didn't take the bus, I didn't take the subway, I drove a car. The car I drive is a hybrid, which gets about 40 miles to the gallon. Now, I used to make this same drive 10 years ago in an old Toyota. This is a Ford Fusion. Vince Sheehy, where are you? I know, there we go. So American-made car, thank you. But I would make that in my old car, which got lesser gas mileage. So I'm traveling the same distance, but I'm paying less for gas. Well, of course, with the gas tax or with the fuel tax, whatever you want to call it, we get our revenues from the amount of gallons that are purchased. So people are purchasing fewer gallons to go the same distance. And the point is, as a result of that, we have all the same vehicle miles traveled on our highways, but we have far less getting purchased in terms of fuel, and that is costing us revenues. We have less money in our transportation trust fund. A portion of the trust fund is also based on purchases of new automobiles. Now, new automobiles is coming back, thankfully, but that was also down a couple years ago. So the bottom line is the revenues have declined. Of the revenues we do collect, because of all the new debt we've issued, over half of it is simply going to pay interest on these bonds that we've already taken out. So we're basically paying interest on projects that have already occurred. The remainder is primarily used for maintenance, which is to say basically paving over the highways and things of that nature. And then at this point, all we have left in state funds for new construction is about $100 million out of our trust fund. So to be honest, if it wasn't for the federal government, there'd pretty much be no new highway construction in the state. There'd really be no new transportation spending at all. And we simply can't count on the federal government to keep, particularly with the new Congress, to keep giving us money. So that's the issue of transportation debt, which that's an issue we're going to have to come to grips with. Next. Okay. The governor has proposed issuing some new debt for transportation. I want to talk a little bit about that. One thing is that rates are comparatively low right now for going out and borrowing money. There are also federal bonds available called Garvey bonds. I don't think it's named after Steve Garvey, but it has something to do with basically future federal appropriations that you are going to get. You can essentially monetize those into bonds that you can issue today. It's essentially the same as the old Franz idea about 10 or 12 years ago. I'm not a huge fan of that because, as I said, we just don't have revenues to sustain the debt service on these bonds, and instead we're going to pull them from general fund revenues, which means, again, we'll be using that money to compete with education, public safety, and other core priorities. So, next slide, please. Okay, I want to talk about sort of where I stand and what my economic game plan is and my priorities. One is, I do think that we can refinance and consolidate state debts. Rates are lower than initially when we went to market on a lot of these bonds, so I think we can save money just like any good business owner can. I think we have to make sure our transportation projects are self-sufficient. I am not a fan of issuing more debt, starting projects, and then basically leaving the debt to be paid off by future generations through the general fund. Again, that's the regular sales and income taxes that would normally support state services. I think that's a huge mistake. I also think we have to avoid gimmicks. You know, I'm happy to talk about the ABC proposal, which seems like it's kind of in a state of constant flux at this point. But I think, you know, opening new liquor stores to pay for transportation, that to me is not a serious idea, and I'm not going to support it. The offshore drilling, again, I don't, you know, we can go back and forth as to the environmental issues in offshore drilling, but thinking that you're going to use money from offshore drilling for transportation when that project at best is 10 to 15 years away, again, I just don't think that's a sustainable idea, and that's not a realistic solution. I think we need to pay down the VRS loan. I see some public safety folks in the back, and you know, there's a lot of issues with our state pension. There's a lot of things that are going to need to happen there in order to get that back on a firm and solid footing. But I think really job number one, we need to tackle that loan that we took out last year before we start talking about surplus, new spending, things of that nature. I think that's very important. One of the ideas I've had is in Virginia, we can be in a position to help small businesses create jobs. And I think, listen, whether you're a Democrat, Republican, independent, whatever, I think you recognize that creating jobs in Northern Virginia, but really also downstate, that's got to be our number one priority in Richmond. And one of the ways we can do that, as I've looked at ways we could create a revolving fund for small businesses to come in and, you know, take credit, you know, have the state government be in a position where we can loan money for small businesses for qualifying projects. I had a bill last year which focused on clean energy projects, but really it could be for any projects, that we can be there for people that are going to go out and create jobs in Virginia and be available to small businesses. I think, you know, that's got to be one of the roles of state government, and I think we can do that. Looking for next generation industries. You know, we have done a great job in attracting defense industries to Virginia. That's wonderful. I look across the river in Montgomery County, they've done a great job of attracting biotech. And sure, some of that has to do with NIH being there. But the bottom line is we have not done enough to bring in biotech and other sort of high-tech industries into Northern Virginia as much as we did, say, 10 years ago. I know there's some folks here from NVTC who can kind of break down how we can do a better job of that. But again, these are the types of industries that over the next 10 years are going to create jobs and create wealth in this community. So, you know, 20 years ago, I got out of college, and it was somewhat similar in that the Berlin Wall had come down, and we were in a complete state of conversion in this community. And I got out, and you know, frankly, there weren't a lot of jobs back then 20 years ago. And then this little thing called the internet came along. And to be honest, that was the biggest thing that hit this area in probably, I don't know, since the Civil War maybe. And you know, you never know what the next generation technology is going to be that's going to create jobs. I know it's out there. One thing unique about Northern Virginia is, and I sort of dispute this with my parents, is that some people think we create jobs because Washington, D.C. is here. And that's true to a point. But the reason why I think we create jobs is because we have so many brilliant people here. And I'm not being facetious. I'm actually being truthful. Yeah, a politician being truthful. You got that on tape, Lowell?
I got it.
In that you have people from all over the world. And I look around this audience today, I know there's people here from nations all over the world, you know, great nations, and the best and the brightest, for whatever reason, have chosen to come to this community. And we have some super bright people here, and they're here, and they're working hard. And I said, this is a hard-working community. Nobody retires to Northern Virginia, okay? They're coming here to work. And you got bright people here to work, to create businesses, to study, and we have them here. And I think the fact that we have bright people here and they're hard-working people, that's why people want to locate their businesses here, because of the human capital. So, you know, I'm worried about what's going to happen with the defense industries, and the senator can brief us on that. But I think regardless of what happens, as we saw 20 years ago, this area is going to come out okay because of the human capital invested. Okay, that's kind of my quick briefing on what's going on in Richmond. I didn't want to waste too much of your time, and I'm happy for any kind of follow-up. And by the way,